Monday, July 22nd, 2024. We will call the City of Mayor City Council meeting to order. If you could please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Do we have any additions to the agenda tonight?
No additions, Mayor.
All right, hearing none, then I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 4-0. That will take public comments. If there's anyone who would like to discuss anything that is not on the agenda, please come to the podium and state your name and address. And seeing none, we will close public comments, move to consent agenda. Is there anything on the consent agenda that needs to be pulled for further discussion? Hearing none, I'll look for a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 4-0. That will take us to consider requests from the EDA to enact a deadline for demolition of the old creamery building.
Thank you, Mayor. So at the last meeting of the EDA, they discussed the topic of the old creamery, and as part of their charge with economic development in the community, they had asked for an update on the status of the old creamery. And the status I gave them was the current property owner understands that his project isn't viable and that his two choices are to sell the property with the building intact or sell the property with the building demolished. And after some discussion, the EDA wanted to bring to council a request and recommendation that a deadline be placed on when the old creamery would be demolished. So they have requested a deadline date of July 31st, 2025, if the property is still in the hands of the current owner and it has not yet been demolished.
Any questions on that? If not, I'll look for a motion to place a deadline of July 31st, 2025 to have the structure demolished unless ownership changes hands and a new plan is in place for development.
Motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion, a second. Any further discussion? And I think this is plenty of a good timeline. I think gives it plenty. We're coming up on almost a year since we first discussed having it torn down and securing it. So, and then obviously working with the current owner, let them know these dates.
Yep.
And what we've done. Obviously, I knew you'd do that, but that's all I have. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 4-0. With that, we can move to consider approval of contract between the City of Mayor and the local 49ers union.
Thank you, Mayor. After a few rounds of negotiations and closed session with council, we have come to an agreement with the local union. Since the last time you guys saw the contract, a couple of changes in there, very low level. We had the attorneys on both sides take a look, and some of the changes in there that they requested was clarifications, putting in language regarding effective dates on when things, because we talked about when things would take effect, but the effective date wasn't necessarily specifically listed. So the attorney said, well, let's put some effective dates in there. One addition was also to when we discussed implementing the step system that we had looked at. A part of that was contingent upon successful performance evaluations, and we have new language in there that says performance evaluations are not grievable under the contract, which is pretty standard language, but that was something brought up on our end. Otherwise, then we also reverted some of the insurance language because it went from saying the city's policy or the city's offered policy, which is the 49ers union, had looked at changing that to specifically stating the 49ers union, but after consulting with the attorney, it says, well, we'll keep that generic. It's not that we're looking to change the plan, but keeping it generic is where we want to be on that. So with that, I believe we have a contract in place, ready to go. The union has signed off on this and approved this version of it. So this comes to us for approval, and this will go from August 1st of 2024 to July 31st, 2026.
Perfect, thank you. That I'll look for motion to approve the contract between the city mayor and the local 49ers union.
Motion.
We have a motion, and a second. Any further discussion? So Nick, thank you for your time working with the bargaining unit and getting us where we are. I think we have a good contract in place. I'm certainly happy with it, and I appreciate you running it by our attorneys also with Tim Sullivan. So I do appreciate that. Any other comments? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 4-0. That will move to city council reports. Councilmember Wagner, anything to report on?
I was at the Rising Community Festival. I did the open house for the sidewalks and the trails. And then last Monday, I was at the EDA meeting. So
Thank you. Councilmember Felsch, anything to report on?
I was also at Mayor Rising. Other than that, nope.
Councilmember Hill?
I was at the EDA and the Rising Community Festival. At the EDA, we did award 7 businesses with grant funding.
Thank you. And as people mentioned, we did have the Mayor Rising Community Festival. It was a success, although it started out a little sketchy with all the rains. So we didn't know where it was going to end up. It turned out great. Obviously, I want to thank all the volunteers that helped, and of course, Deputy Hendricks and Ryan from the Carver County Sheriff's Department, who the first time put on a bike rodeo, which was very well received and a big success. So I think it was a good addition. And with that, I want to thank R&V Auto and Towing. They donated one of the bikes that were given away, and also Knuckleheads Bar and Grill for donating a bike for the giveaway. So that was great. It was a good turnout. And of course, thank you to Lauren, Zach, and Tom Stifter for all their work. They did most of the heavy lifting on this. They do most of the organizing on this. I want to thank them too. So it was a good turnout. So with that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 4-0. We are adjourned. With that, we can move right into the work session for the 2025 budget first look.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know how much time we're going to have left here, seeing as our council meeting was twice as long as the one prior to that. But 2025 budget first look. First thing I want to go over right off the bat is going over our budget schedule. So our first look is tonight. We're going to take a look at preliminary changes, and then we work through the general fund up front. And the reason for that is, as you can see on September 23rd, we have to adopt our preliminary levy. And how it works with the preliminary levy is you can always lower the levy in December, but you cannot raise it. So that is something we want to have really dialed in. And it's been throughout my entire career, my budget philosophy is I don't like to do the process of set the preliminary levy a little on the high side, knowing it'll come down. I want to hit that as close to the bullseye as humanly possible. So I've been fairly successful in that in my career. So I'm going to continue with that practice. So our focus over the next few months are going to be heavy on the general fund, as you can see there, looking at CIP as well. And then once the preliminary levy is set, and we know where that's going to land, then we look to the enterprise funds, which is our utility funds, water, sewer, and storm sewer. On that front, we take a harder look at those because we don't have to set levies for those. And as we get through the final months, we get more data, more monthly data about our revenues and expenses and how those are turning out. And that really helps guides us dial in the utility funds. We look at our utility rate study, see if we need to update that and those things. Then on December 9th, we'll have our truth and taxation public hearing, and then we'll adopt our final levy and budget for 2025. And that's the schedule we're looking at. So as we get into the budget itself, this year, also one thing to mention on a schedule, I like to do one at nearly every council meeting rather than doing big 2-3 hour budget meetings, waiting a long time. Everybody forgets what was said at the first one, and we got to rehash for another 2-3 hours. Break it up into small pieces each time that builds on top of the one previous. So that way easily digestible. We remember what we've done over the course of the period, and then that builds into a really nice final budget. So with that, getting into the budget itself, talking a little bit about budget philosophy and how I put these together. I like to do the style I like to go through is zero-based budgeting. You have the other couple other options are you do just a flat increase, like you do just a 3% increase across the board on everything and call it a day. I like zero-based budgeting where I start from zero on everything and then I build back the categories. I go into the accounting software. I look at each of the line items, see what was deposited in there and what was expensed out of those. See if it makes sense. Sometimes you have one-time expenses that don't necessarily justify an increase in the budget because it's a one-off thing, but you really got to dig in and analyze. Otherwise, you're not tightening that up as much as you really could. For the revenues, I like to budget us slightly on the higher side to make sure we're doing well there. And then expenditures be a bit tighter. So revenues on the higher side, or I'm sorry, opposite way. Revenues on the lower side, expenses on the higher side, so that if revenues, you have a shortfall in the revenues, you're still going to do okay. And if you're a little long on the expenditure, you've got a little room there. Not that you design a room in there, but it happens to work out. And that's been a good experience over my career on that. This year, we don't nearly have as much moving and shaking on things as we did last year. We were transitioning back because we had the street project and we're getting the levy lowered back down. We were moving a bunch of departments and the fire department was getting consolidated. Administration was getting consolidated, moving things around in categories, not doing nearly as much of that. So this gets to be a bit more straightforward. So we'll look at the budget where we're starting out in the general fund as well as the enterprise funds. Then I want to take a look at the levy projection worksheet that we use. That's our working document. Look at our tax rate comparison and where we stand with the rest of Carver County. Then take a quick look at debt and see where that's falling as well. Just so everybody's refreshed on where we're going with that. So hitting it off here, we'll start with the general fund on the revenue side. So if you've never seen budget codes before, take a look at this. So the city's finances uses a fund accounting system which is broken up into broken up into funds. And that's where we talk about general fund, water fund, sewer fund, storm sewer fund, the CIP funds, debt service funds down the line. And so where you find that is in the first three digits. The first three digits here are referred to as the fund code. General fund being 100, water being 620, sewer being 640, and so on. The second set of digits in there, the 5-digit code, that's the department code. So this becomes more prevalent when we look at, say, the expense side of things. We're right here, it lists the 41,000 as general government. Fire department is 42,200, police services is 42,100, streets 43,100. And so on. When we're in the revenue side of things, you have a 5-digit code for revenues, and that's your tell that this is a revenue code if you see 5. If you get in the expense side, it drops down to a 3-digit code. So that's a quick tell on whether you're in revenues or expenses on that front. So then each of these, like 31,000, when you look at that, it doesn't matter where you're at, that will always be general property taxes. 32,240 will always be animal license, similar on the expense side of things. So with that, we'll start taking a look at the key differences. Now, generally speaking, when we look at things such as insurances and wages and salaries, since those are locked in, I'm not going to go over those in detail. They're included in there, but I don't highlight them because they're the same across the board for the various departments and the funds. So I'll touch on more of the key differences in here. So in here, you can see that general fund or General fund property taxes is up by 14,000. Why that is to keep a placeholder in that levy spreadsheet, and it's really to keep the levy flat when we look at things on the totality side of things. So this number likely to change float depending on what we want to do with that as we go through our budgeting process. The next big change we have in here is under tower antenna rent. I was able to clean up a lot of the subcontracts we have, get a lot of the revenue streams that should have been going back on task. And so that was going to net us an additional $25,000 a year that we weren't seeing in years past. We got the backdated checks, so that's going to look good for 2024, but making sure that those payments are coming in going forward. So we'll see a lift in that, which is good. Under fire contracts, looking at an $18,641 increase. And what that is primarily from is how our fire contracts are set up with the townships. It's based on the expenses of the fire, the maintenance and operations, as well as the debt service and CIP go into the formulations of how the fire contracts are calculated. And since for 2025, those are based on the 2024 budget. When we do contracts, it's always based on the year prior's budget. So for 2026 contracts, we'll be using 2025 numbers, so on and so forth. So this being based on 2024 budget, we had the very large one-time expense with the para payment. We also had some increases in other areas to keep up with rising costs. So we had a big one there. I foresee in 2026, this number will come back down again and level off. But for this year, this is what we're expecting and why. We're also having an increase under refunds and reimbursements. We do supply health insurance for the widow, Mrs. Vollmer. And I was able to locate a reimbursement program through Department of Public Safety that will give us the money back, majority of it on those expenses. And we were successful in 2024 in getting a lot of that funding back. When I was applying for it, it was at the end of 23. I didn't include it in 24's budget because I didn't know where it was going to land. Now that I've had confirmation of where that's going to land, I know what to expect for 2025. So we're looking at that as a reliable source moving forward. And I'll always keep in tabs with Department of Public Safety to see where that's at moving into the future. Those are the big changes on the revenue side. On the expense side of things, right off the bat in general government, decreasing auditing and accounting services by 5,000. This was kept on the higher side for 2023 and 2024. When I was looking at the 24 budget, looking at potentially dropping it back down, but Tracy Schaefer has done a really good job of picking things up, and the amount of time that she's been working with the auditors to pick up skills and get training was accelerated faster than anticipated. So we're going to anticipate less usage of the auditors for those training services moving forward, and thus we can look at dropping it back down here. The EDA has also made a request to City Council. I didn't have the agenda for official businesses. We'd be talking about it under budget as we move forward, but they're requesting an additional $25,000 as part of their transfer. They received $50,000 this year. And for this, they received $120,000 in grant requests, of which they awarded $65,000 in grant funding. You might say, well, that's over the 50 that they were given. The EDA had about $20,000 already in their fund, so it was about $70,000. Of that, they awarded 65 since they had a good grant turnout. We're hoping and expecting good grant turnout again in future years. So they're making a request for an additional $25,000 to increase it to 75 to give out as grants in anticipation of that. Moving down, not too many major changes here. Elections here, it's just that's getting axed out because we're not having elections in 25. Looking at the police contract going up almost $7,773, and that's based on cost increases of the contract that'll be coming out here for approval as we get towards later in the year. We've received those numbers. Under fire protection, wages and salaries for the fire department, a little bit red in the face on this one, but the spreadsheet I was using that I had found and inherited was not accurate as far as predicting wages and salaries for the fire department. There were some missing numbers in there, quite a bit, as you can see. So to come back into better alignment with what the cost actually will be, that's why you're seeing this jump up on that front. So discovered that error after we had approved the 2024 budget. And so I've got it corrected now. This also is potentially taking a look at an adjustment for the fire department hourly wages. We had last adjusted them in 22 going into 23, and at that time, the council wanted to see more regular updates on that rather than doing these every 5-ish years, leaps forward. So I'm preparing data like I did for the wage analysis for city staff. I'm preparing something along those lines as well for fire department wages and salaries as well. So I'll be getting that to personnel committee here in the near future. Scrolling down, then we get towards street lighting. This number has lagged behind in years, making predictions of catching up, but this figure here took a longer and harder look at that, and especially as costs have been rising on the electrical side of things. So increasing that to make sure that we're staying ahead of it. Like for 2024, for example, I'm predicting we'll be a couple thousand behind. This will probably land in that 36-ish area. And then 2023 is in that 34-ish area. So catching back up on that. Small things on to professional services with Park, bringing that back down. We had it increased in 24. Expecting some other things to happen, but they're not materializing. One of those was we were using a lawn care service to do some of our park maintenance. We haven't used that since 22, so it's removing that cost calculation. Since we have 3 people on Public Works now, we don't foresee a need to use that for quite some time, if ever. So we can axe that out. Plus, we're also reducing the cost of mini BIF service in Old Schoolhouse Park since we're going to have the bathrooms there.
Oh, yeah.
So we're not going to need to have the expense of a mini BIF. So those two combined brings us back down into this range. And that is the very first look at the general fund for 2024 or 2025. You can see right now we're sitting at about 5,000 revenues over expenditures as we sit right now. And the idea is when we hit September, we want to have this really close to zero as possible. And then in December, we'll certainly have it balanced out for sure. So any questions on anything that I've highlighted or anything that I didn't highlight that you had questions on?
On the Park and Rec, you will reduce the repairs and maintenance.
Weren't seeing nearly as much repairs and maintenance under there.
So with the splash pad going in, do you think this is the right time? I don't know what that's gonna.
So with that, the general repairs and maintenance is lower than 12.5. So it's like in 2023, our general repairs and maintenance without a splash pad came to about 10,000. So I was boosting this up to 15. I think I overshot. I don't think we're going to have that much in repairs and maintenance into the splash pad when it's new. So this leaves about 2,500 cushion specifically for the splash pad. And then we can adjust as we see it coming in. But we still have the electrical here for the splash pad remaining at 9, even though we haven't had a full run of it. So with this, we still have some cushion for the splash pad in there. It's not as much as the full 15. We can certainly adjust that if we want to be conservative on that nature. I wouldn't push back against that in the slightest.
Yeah, I think that's something to come back to. I think you make a good point that we can get 1 year. and know if we're gonna get vandalism or problems in the bathrooms or
Mhm.
spray paint, whatever it may be, or just something we have to fix without knowing, but we're only talking, what,
$2,500.
$2,500.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I'm not overly concerned with it, but I think it's something to keep earmarked.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't have any issue whatsoever. Said you wanted to go 15 just to make sure there was enough, and then 2026, like, all right, we can drop it back down.
Yeah. See, and I kind of looked like we went up and then we went down, and I understand if we're not hitting it, but I was like, it just seemed odd that we would.
Right.
More of the maintenance than a repair aspect is.
There, I'm assuming we have some warranty that we'd be able to go back on. but
True.
Any other question?
that's a good
Sorry.
point.
Any other questions on general fund before we move on to enterprise?
This looks good. No big surprises.
Nope, nothing big.
That's great.
What did I have? This 145.
And the salaries, you have the step in there calculated based on
Yep.
when Kyle hits his anniversary and Scott and.
Yep, I got all that predictive in there. Now, my spreadsheet I use for wages and salaries for everything but fire works really well.
Well, I wasn't questioning.
No,
but
no,
I was
yeah.
just-
Yep, but in that wage and benefit spreadsheet, I take into account health insurance increases. I usually budget for 10%. We'll know in a month or so what that will actually be, but I like to do that on the high end because then at the end of the day, again, with expenses being on the wider side, if it only comes in at 6, well, okay, we get to shrink that and then we get to shrink the levy a little bit when we hit there. But
Okay.
I don't want to go short and only predict a 3 and then it turns out to be 14. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
On that front. But yeah, the wage spreadsheet I use calculates into that step increases year over year. Now that we've got that established, that's all been plugged into there.
Thank you.
On the water fund end of things, not a ton of changes in here. Based upon our utility rate spreadsheet, I've got 2% in here for rate increase. Otherwise, not a whole lot of changes on the revenue side on that front. On the expense side of things, adjusting debt service and that, and we'll go over that in the future because debt service, when we look at 2026 into 2027, we'll be seeing a good break there. Otherwise, no shocking adjustments on a lot of stuff in here. Just pretty smooth sailing on the water fund end of things. Sewer fund end of things, we have the big notable one is because our debt service is defeased as of 2024. For the sewer fund going into 2025, we are no longer levying for the debt service, so that drops off completely. Otherwise, things stay pretty well the same. Otherwise, on the expense side of things, as you can see, since we have the defeased debt service, debt drops off completely. We will see about having debt coming back on at some point when we pull the trigger on the phase 1 project, but we have to get the PSIG funding before we do that. When we go down to sewer treatment, and a notable adjustment in here is on chemicals and chemical products. I've been tracking this for the last couple of years, kept it at 25, but after seeing some more data and getting things narrowed down, we can drop this by $5,000 to 20. We are not spending nearly 25 or on the upper teens when it comes to this. So this will keep us good on that front. For biosolids disposal, you'll see this again vacillated a bit here. What I've discovered over the years is that we don't have a static number of biosolids disposals each year. Sometimes it's 2, and off years it's 3. So when you have 2, we're meeting 30 just fine. When we go up to 3, then that adds more expense into it. So, and it's not on a regular cycle either. You get 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2. It's an odd cycle when the biosolids happen. So adding a bit more back in there to compensate for that. Otherwise, general adjustments in utilities end of things, just with changes in that. And then you can see here's revenues over expenditures with the debt service gone and what have you. The goal of council is to keep that steady until we see what's going to come on board for debt service. And our debt service should be in about that 100 to 120 range. That's what we're going to the goal will be once we kick off the phase 1 project.
So, sorry,
Nope.
down a little more. To the biosolids dump, wherever that was. Right, 2 to 3 a year. Once we get phase 1 and we go through that, that should go down, right?
Yeah, that'll go down. There's actually, we've been talking in-house, Public Works and I, about the cost of that. There's potential changes coming on the MPCA level that's going to make it more difficult for people or contracted services to spread that, which is what we do now. We pay Lester Prairie to go ahead and take that and then spread it on some fields. The alternative we're looking at is buying some equipment in-house and doing the spreading ourselves. We'll contract with a farm field in the area, and then we would do the spreading, which is possible to do. And that would eliminate the cost of biosolids disposal completely because we're doing it ourselves. The trade-off is that we would need to purchase equipment in order to do so, a tractor and a honey wagon, things of that nature. So we're looking at costs on that benefit, cost versus benefit. And once we get that a bit more solid, we'll definitely be discussing that with council.
Yeah, but part of the sewer improvement plan
Yes,
is like bigger storage, having to do it only once a year because the farmers don't like it. Like they want it in the fall.
yep,
They don't like it in the spring.
yep,
Like all
absolutely.
of that kind of stuff. So regardless of what else happens, once we go through that project, that would come down and be a once a year.
The once a year expense, it might
It
go
may
down.
be the same though, because the quantity will be larger one time.
It could see a little savings because we're not doing it twice a year. It's just one dump and just getting rid of it. So you're not making an extra trip. You're not doing an extra spreading. Could save some on that mobilization end of things. Storm sewer end of things. Storm sewer is always the most boring of the utility funds because rarely things ever change. As you can see here, we can fit the entire budget onto one side of a page. Engineering fees will stay pretty much flat. Repairs and maintenance pretty much flat. Capital, that drops back down because this year we're looking at having our storm sewer pond sonared, and that'll then help us create the CIP for when do we dredge the storm ponds, in what priority order, what those costs look like, and then we can start building a CIP around that. But outside of that, bringing that cost back down because we figured it'd be about that 20-ish thousand to get her done. EDA side of things, looking at if their request is approved, that increase there, which is directly proportionate down here to how much grant funding they give out. So that goes right back into grant funding on that front. So that is the very first look at our 2025 budget. Next onto this, this spreadsheet, Sam, this will be new to you. For council, they've seen this quite a bit before because I like to harp on it. I like to do some outlook into the future years on what our levy is going to look like, what's our CIP doing, what's our debt doing. So taking a good look at that. So I project out here to 2030. Now, this is not some crystal ball. It's not set in stone. This is our living, working document. This will be making changes every single year as we take a look at this. This is by no means our hard, fast line that we go on. But it helps us give us idea, whereas before, what is it doing potentially? So where this gets broken up into the three sections, the first being the capital, the second being debt, and then the loose third being the general fund, which doesn't have necessarily break out, but it's a pull up on that. So in here, we look at what we levy for the fire department. That goes towards their equipment purchases over the years. See, in 2025, that's going up because we built the CIP last year, realizing we need to increase that in order to make sure that our fire department equipment is fully funded. The idea being is that we don't want to have to take out equipment certificates in the future to pay for equipment. That saves us on issuance costs of the debt as well as interest payments on that debt service as well. So this gets us in line with that. For the streets, you can see here, 2023 was the big up year because we had the big mill and overlay project, brought that back down to get back in line, and we're looking good on that in the future. Not seeing a ton of change on this. The reason being is with the new tax revenue source, whether you agree with the tax that was implemented or not, aside, we have projected funding that's going to be coming to us in 2025. It's not shown in here because it's a state revenue that'll go right into the 405 fund for streets. We're looking at about $47-ish thousand if predictions hold. That will be on top of the 110 that we put in there for street maintenance work, seal coating, mills and overlays, things of that nature. So once we kind of see those numbers come in, we'll get those incorporated into the CIP and see what that does. So right now, just kind of holding steady to see what those extra revenues do. Parks and Rec, that was increased by $25,000 in 2024 to $75,000, and that's holding steady there. Asphalt sidewalk replacement, where this comes from, you can see down here, PW building, which stands for the Public Works Building that was recently finished in 2023. That funding then got shifted up into asphalt sidewalk replacement. We have a number of aged trails in town that we haven't set aside money for reconstruction, and thus being the point of the sidewalk and trails implementation plan we're putting together. So we can solidify that. We're doing our public outreach piece to serve as one of those foundational components. So when we go after construction grants to redo these trails, we're putting the money away to act as that match so we can get this done and move forward with it. We also had made changes last year to how the 435 general capital works. Prior to this, if there was a revenue over expenditure in the general fund and that the fund balance was over the fund balance policy, the difference of that was deposited into the 435 fund. That was a very unreliable way of funding general capital improvements, because if you're doing budgeting right, you're not putting any money into that fund. So we wanted to make sure, like everything else, had a dedicated revenue stream for the CIP items in here. General capital tends to handle in the general fund, so like park mowers, public works trucks, the roof of City Hall, the windows that got replaced with the stucco, it handles those various things. So that's where we have these looking off into the future, sum totaled here at the bottom. Then when we get down into the second portion on the debt side of things, this takes our debt service that is existing. I did add one in here that wasn't in last year's. As we look at the 2nd Street Northwest project that's in front of Zion and in that area, we're probably looking in that 2029, 2030 area of doing a reconstruct in that area, potentially looking at adding in Morning Drive as well, since that's getting aged to the point where we're replacing the street rather than mill and overlaying, and the infrastructure in there is getting on the older side as well. We haven't determined if we would do slip lining of that sewer line. If we would do a full reconstruct, we'll need to do some televising of that to make sure, but starting to set the stage for the possibility of new debt service on that front as we look at it. The rest of these all are our bond payments. The 2023 A bond, that was the mill and overlay. 2021 A bond, that is for the fire station. 2021 B, I believe that was for the 4th Street project. 2020 A is for some equipment that was purchased. This is 2017. This is the amount that we levy that goes into the sewer fund. That's 2017 A. And then the 15 and 14. 14 is already done, and then 15 is wrapping up here this year. So those will be falling off going into 2025.
I think you meant 5th Street project.
5th Street project, yes. 5th Street project. So Down into this section, this then pulls it down and wraps it together. For the general fund, for future years, I simply add a 4% inflator onto the existing year that we're working on. And when we actually get to budget time, we're going to dial that in and really get close. But I have to have some sort of predictor in there to give us an idea of what it's going to look like. So I throw in 4% inflator in there. So when we get to the bottom here, you can see the dollar change and what the levy is looking at doing. You can see the percent change, and then we can get can't really predict out this far what the tax rate is going to look like just because tax base changes, valuations change, and I can't predict that very well. But for 2025, we're looking in that 37-ish % on that. So when we pull it across to the handy dandy levy graph, we can see what that's doing over time. So the total that you can see here, I'll go to the total. How about that? So the total, or leveling off here, then slow 2%-ish increases going to the futures, stable. And even those might be offset by additional housing and additional valuation changes. So that could remain, from a tax rate standpoint, rather flat.
Nice job, Nick.
Getting stable. And then when we take a look at tax rate comparison on this, so this is what we've got for the existing years, and then where mayor has ranked. Not that it's a competition, and I want to put this up front because every city is a little different, but comparisons are made on tax rates. So our ranking, this goes the lowest in the ranking. So out of the 11 cities, and we were in the fifth and sixth ranking, sixth lowest, and in 2024, we slipped to fourth lowest in the county at 38.8%. And the number 3 slot is currently being held by Chaska at 36%. So again, not that we're in competition, but we could be in striking distance of Chaska, depending on what Chaska does with their levy moving forward. But sitting in a pretty good position here, I like to think. And then touching on the debt side of things as we wrap up here. So I have a big debt. If you notice anything, Sam, it's a lot of spreadsheets thrown together.
It makes sense. I promise. Once you get used to it, it really makes good sense.
This, I aggregate all of our debt service that we have, and that gets pulled into the levy calcs on the on this side of things. It gets pulled into there, but this one also takes into account water, sewer, and if there was for storm, it'd be in there. Here you can see we have the 2017 A dropping off for 2025, so there's no debt on sewer currently. The one I'd like to go to on this one and point to is the water fund, because this is the aggregate of 4 bonds, 2006, 2015, 2006, 2015, and the 2020, so 3 bonds, sorry, on that. We're seeing a little decrease as the 2015 A drops off. And then when we get to 2026, will be the last payment on our 2006 PFA bond, because that's a 20-year issuance, and that drops off. And whereas with some other, like the sewer fund, for example, we're predicting debt to come back on, and the water fund, we're not predicting debt to come back on. Water treatment plant is in really good shape. The water tower is in really good shape. The wells are doing just fine. We're not predicting a big street project that's going to rip up a bunch of the infrastructure to replace it. Yeah, we might have a little bit with the 2nd Street Northwest project, but that's in the grand scheme, that's a smaller project in the scheme of things. So we're looking good here. Maybe at some point in the future, we look at lime softening on the front end to help control our chlorides, but that's a toss up in the air. And I can tell you that's a $12 million project if we were to do softening on the municipal end of things. So a lot of things would have to happen before we bid off debt on that front. So as we run into the 2026, 2027, I touched on it a little bit last year when we looked at our utility rate study that this was coming. We'll have to decide Now, where do we want our fund balance to be right now? Water fund sitting at about 600,000. And so for fund balance policy scope of things, for utility funds, you generally want to have 6 months worth of expenditures at any given time. And as you saw in the water fund is about $550,000 a year. So if you're talking 275 at 6 months, we're at 600,000. We're sitting really good on fund balance for water. So there's a lot we could do here and a lot of flexibility in what we could do with this drop off here, just as a, not for 2025, but as a prelude of things to come. So with that, I've covered all of my topics on the first look for the budget. Any questions?
That's a great start.
Nice job as usual.
Trying to get her dialed in here good and early and
Jumps out.
Mm.
Shocking.
And as if you've got it in your hands, if you look at it, if something jumps out, you got a question on anything, of course, you know, you can email me, text me, call me, ask questions. I like to be very transparent in my budgeting process. I should be sending out here the 6-month revenue expense report to you guys as part of the financials. Now that we're through June, I can crank that out so you can see where things are actually sitting for 2024 on that front.
Sam, I know you've met with Nick a few times.
Yeah.
But like I said, don't hesitate to call, stop in early, anything. If you haven't already, I'd recommend getting a hold of Kyle and touring the wastewater plant. Or
Get to do that.
the water plant and the wastewater plant.
Yeah.
It'll help just seeing it and see how they operate, where all this money's going. And
Mhm.
I think it's beneficial. Kyle would love to take you around.
Okay.
He has no problem doing that.
If I can make a recommendation, I think the best time to go on a tour of the facilities, especially the wastewater facilities, find a nice 90-degree July day
Don't do it.
In the front building?
and really get that full flavor of the facility.
Really. Perfect. Looks good. Anything else? Any other comments, questions?
Not right
Wonderful.
now.
So thank you again, and we'll just keep moving forward on it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
We will adjourn.
Thanks, Nick.
I was in a landfill, but